Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast that explores the Great Resignation. I'm your host, Brian Akar. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the reasons they decided to leave their jobs during the pandemic and what has happened since. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. In today's episode, I chat with Natalie Serebrennik. Natalie spent 16 successful years in capital markets to venture into the world of coaching and consulting. Her journey is a testament to the power of self-advocacy and the pursuit of one's true calling. Now join us as she shares her insights on navigating the corporate ladder, the importance of self-advocacy, and the skills that can open doors to professional success. Her story is also one of transformation and empowerment. Let's go check it out. All right, welcome back. So I'm excited to introduce our guest, Natalie Serebrennik. She's the founder of Natalie Serebrennik Coaching and Consulting. Now, she has over 16 years of experience in capital markets and actually left her corporate role to embark on a mission to help others succeed in their careers. Now, she's a mentor, a speaker, and really a source of inspiration for those who are looking to achieve their professional dreams. And she has a coaching practice where she focuses on developing critical skills like self-advocacy, networking, and personal development, which we'll talk a lot about today. And really her journey from corporate world to entrepreneurship is a testament to her dedication. So Natalie, it's a pleasure to have you on the show and welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and dive into this really important conversation today.
Oh, definitely. And so I always like to share where I actually meet my guests, right? Because I'm a big fan of, where are these, Brian, where are you finding all these folks? And so we actually met in the comments of LinkedIn, right? Under Aoife O'Brien's post. So I'm really glad that we were able to connect, and shout out to Eva. She's on season 3 as well. And so that's where we met. And so you want to share a little bit like the comment that really sparked our meet and greet?
Yeah, sure. It was, if memory serves me right, it was all about self-advocacy. And this is like my bread and butter belief system for what really propelled the growth in my career. And being able to speak on that and share my experience has been a transformative, enlightening for me, not only being able to reflect on my journey, but being able to share my story with others and have them resonate with that message and make changes to their lives. So it was in that post that you're like, okay, I can see something in there.
Oh yeah. And for folks who have been following me for some time, and folks who are following me on LinkedIn, I'm quick to jump in the comments when I see somebody who they make a statement. They're like, and I found this because I left my job here too. That's like the bat signal for me. And so I'm really glad that we connected. So, prior to getting into discussing your current work, would love to talk a little bit about, your upbringing and professional background.
Yeah, absolutely. So my story is not unique. I grew up with immigrant parents. They immigrated to Canada from Russia, 48 years ago.
Wow.
So as soon as they came here, very true in that immigrant story in the sense that they really didn't have much, right? They came here with nothing. They really had to build up their story, their careers, their everything for my brother and I, and, running a few jobs at the same time and truly just trying to make ends meet, and landed in corporate and stayed there for just over 40 years until they retired. So that was the example that I grew up in hard work and just really putting your head down and focusing. And that is how you advance in your life and your career. That was the example that I was taught and how I was raised. So I brought that with me into my as my professional life as a student, I took school extremely seriously. For me, the validation I seeked from them was achieved through getting good grades. So that was a strong motivation for me. And that carried throughout my university career and into my corporate life. And honestly, Brian, I really did not know what I wanted to do with my life in a professional setting after school. But I did know that I was very motivated to make as much money as I possibly could. Mm-hmm. So that's that honest. Being the driver, and that really was an extension of my upbringing and not having much at the beginning and then having more of a comfortable life and seeing what money did for my family and the luxuries we were able to participate in. And I wanted that for myself. That was important. So I chose a career path in finance, in capital markets, working on a trading floor so that I can achieve that same success.
And despite the money piece, right? Was there something specific that drew you to capital markets?
So outside, the money was a big part of it.
Right.
Not gonna lie, that was a big part of it. But also it was the adrenaline and the rush and the fast-paced nature. I'm a sucker for all of those types of like Boiler Room and all of those movies that you saw.
I love that movie.
Right? So good. And I just, it felt like a very addictive and just a high energy type environment that I knew would mesh well with my personality. So it was that mixed in with the money potential, all of that. I glamorized that career so much before I stepped into it based on everything I've heard and what it appeared to look like on the outside.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. Now, and one of the things we talked about, even in our opening, we talked about the importance of self-advocacy in advancing in one's career. And now you talked about how you were in capital markets, you're in the finance space, you're on the trading floor. And, let's be honest, there's not a lot of people who look like you in those types of spaces, right? And so could you tell us about maybe a personal experience where really self-advocacy made a significant difference in your own professional journey?
Absolutely. And you're not wrong, right? Like you look around and for every 10 men, there might be one woman. So my experience was very much like kind of always feeling like I had to break that glass ceiling for women, for myself, and the struggle to be able to, have that voice. And I remember that moment so vividly, like it was yesterday when I began my self-advocacy journey. It was when I was getting my performance review, December 2015, sitting across the table. I know exactly the office from my manager, awaiting to hear what I thought was going to be like, yes, you got that pay bump that you wanted and that you've been asking for, and you're well on your way onto that next promotion. And when I wasn't met with that feedback, I instantly, a trigger went off in me. It was like this siren, this bell, everything. And it was that realization in that moment that everything I had been doing and the strategy that I was throwing myself into, that of putting my head down, doing good work, and, waiting patiently for my manager to see all my worth, to see all my value, and reward me accordingly. It triggered in that moment. It wasn't working. That strategy maybe was keeping me in that seat, but it wasn't propelling me the way that I truly wanted. So that's when it started. That was my aha moment. It really grew out of frustration and anger leaving that room. And that's when my self-advocacy journey began. And honestly, Brian, it's not a one and done strategy that you could do one day and you're done. I'm done. And now I've self-advocated for myself and my career is going to grow because of this, one-time effort. It's a practice that I invested, year after year, learning exactly how to self-advocate for yourself and what that truly meant.
No, without a doubt. And we're definitely going to explore a little bit more of that a little bit later too. But before that, my origins for this show really came out of the pandemic. And at the time, March 2020 is like a nice signal for everybody as to when the madness begins, if you will. So let's want to take you back to that time, March 2020. Talk to us a little bit of how the pandemic affected you.
Well, first of all, I never in a million years would have thought that a whole trading floor type environment can go virtual. Like, to me, that was crazy. And it actually happened, within 2 months, everyone was working from home. Nuts. And honestly, I look at that period of my life, and of course there was, hurt and worry and scare and what you've heard about other people. It was a very frightening time for everyone in the world. But I look back and I honestly, I'm thankful for that experience, because it gave myself the pause that I didn't even realize I needed in my career, in my life, to truly ask that question: am I truly happy? What do I want out of my career for my next chapter? And give me that opportunity to be more present with my children and my family. And being a woman on a trading floor, being a man on a trading floor for that matter, gender irrelevant, you work a lot. You're in the office a lot. You're entertaining clients a lot. You're missing out on drop off, pickup, a lot of evenings with the kids. And having all of that shut down, those expectations, and so that we were all forced to, luckily, in my opinion, I was grateful for that, to be at home and to reestablish. And then I had more time to think about those questions that I was alluding to earlier. What do I really want out of my career next?
No, without a doubt. And so, you start picking up these learnings. What were some of the kind of signals to say, like, hey, outside of what I'm doing now, I now have this extra time. Were there certain moments for you that were like, hey, this is something new that I may want to explore a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. And I still remember exactly the point in the pandemic. So it hit in March, and I was throwing myself in the last few years of my career, up until that point, into mentorship. I got really involved in being able to give back and help others as they're navigating similar struggles in their career that I had gone through. And I was catching up with one of my mentees in December, actually, of 2020. I had been helping him throughout the year cement his positioning and visibility to ask for more and ultimately get more. And he was updating me in December with everything that he achieved. And through that feedback and that self-reflection was when I had that aha moment. You know what? There's something more to this. In my professional career up until this moment, that feeling that I had with him wasn't something I ever felt doing my day-to-day job. So it was a pivotal point for me when I started to realize, is there more to this experience?
No, that definitely makes sense. Is there anything that you would have done differently during the pandemic, looking back now?
It's a good question. I'm so grateful for the experience, honestly, that I'm nothing really comes to mind that I could have done anything different. I'm proud of myself that I leaned into this aha moment, and I did the research, and I took the steps to get comfortable with what that potentially could look like. I invested in a certification during the time, because now I automatically had more time back in my calendar because I wasn't commuting back to and from work. I didn't have these client outings. So I all of a sudden had all this extra time in my calendar. And with that aha moment, I was able to invest in it. And I did. and I didn't let the fear of the unknown hold me back. And up until that moment, honestly, Brian, I'm probably the most, one of the most like risk adverse people out there. I think through a decision until I turn blue in the face. And it was eye-opening to me that this was not something that I overanalyzed. It was truly a weekend decision, and I just leaned in. I'm like, what's the worst case scenario?
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And so look, after being with your organization for about 16 years, right? And that's a good run. You decide to leave your role in March of 2023. So
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, why did you leave your job?
So when I had that realization in the pandemic that now I know what that next stage of my career is going to look like, I realized that it wasn't in the bank setting. But I also knew that I had this gap to fill. Education and knowledge gathering is important for me. So that's why I invested in that certification. And then I needed to actually test drive what this is going to feel like in a coaching type scenario, right? So the certification I did was a coaching certification training. And then I wanted to know, because of my passion that was really coming out of me when I was helping others navigate their careers, it's like I had to really test drive it to see if it was feasible. And so the steps actually started back at that moment after I had that conversation with one of my mentees back in December 2020. And it took me that long to get comfortable with the decision to leave. I had to figure out the finances. I had to coach myself through this decision. It's not easy to walk away from a career you've built up and the success that you've achieved after all of the struggles, all of the, obstacles that you've had to go through, that I went through personally. And to walk away from that, to take a huge risk. There's no guarantee in anything in life, but at least staying in corporate, I knew that I could rely on my steady paycheck. Whereas if I was walking away to do this, I didn't have that. I had to build it all from scratch. So it took me that long. It took me those few years to get comfortable with the decision and to plan for that next step.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that because, I think about all the factors that are quote unquote against you, if you will, to do something like this. You've essentially right out of college, you got into finance. You've been in one career for a long time. You mentioned some of the struggles that you said, like the fighting to get X and Y and Z. And when you get those things, it must have been really hard to make that decision. And I'm sure a lot of people either are or have been in similar situations. Now, because of that, what do you think? How did you get through that mentally? Like, how did you get over that hump? Because a lot of the things I talk about in some of my content, fear and kind of taking that leap. What got you over that hump outside, like, after the conversation? What was it that eventually got you there? Because I think people really struggle with that.
And by that, you mean getting over the hump and leaving corporate officially?
And leaving corporate. Yes.
Yeah. I kept coming back to, no one will ever be able to take away the 16 years, almost 17 years I've built up in this industry. That work experience, that grit, that knowledge gained, that's mine. If, and that's a big if, this new path doesn't work out, what's to say I can't go back? And the idea of regretting the steps not taken was too heavy for me to not lean into it and try. And like I alluded to earlier, the expression, when you know, you know. Truly, when I had that aha moment a few years back, I knew. Brian, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that was the quickest decision for me to make to start exploring this new chapter and listening to that voice inside, and like the mind, the body, soul, everything aligned so deeply that every step that I took over those few years, that decision and that fear started getting a little bit like easier to make and like easier to manage.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing for me, the key was that I didn't stop, and I just kept taking those steps to get more comfortable.
I like that. I like that a lot. And so now you start your coaching and consulting practices, right? And you talked about a little bit about the origins, but now how did, because when you left, the pandemic was still kind of going on a little bit, right? But how did some of the circumstances of the pandemic, making this decision, like, did you face any challenges when launching your coaching practice?
So when I was launching, I made a conscious effort that I would step away from corporate completely and then have the conversations with my network that I've built up over the years. And I made that decision because I almost needed to let go of that big corporate aspect in order to fully lean into this new opportunity. So a lot of those conversations that I was starting to have, because I left at the end of March of this year. So April was really that time when I was leaning into having those conversations. It was difficult because not a lot of people were back in the office. And
Right.
I've gotten so used to from a face-to-face interaction perspective. And, I've encountered and been participated in a lot of industry groups that naturally would be my initial go-tos to have this conversation. Hey, this is what I'm doing now. How can we work together to, like, I want to help you. Let's figure out a way to do this to spread the message. And because that was more of a challenge in a virtual setting, I had to explore different ways to get my messaging out. And I'll be the first one to admit, social media for me is not my natural go-to place, right? I hardly use social media even in my personal life, even before this decision. And now all of a sudden I was turning to LinkedIn. That's my major platform to share my voice and be vulnerable on a public stage. And truly, that was the biggest hurdle for me personally to get over. That fear of just like, what are other people going to think of you as you're posting your ideas and your opinions and your tips and your strategies and building an authority on a platform for everyone to see and potentially judge, right? On the sidelines. That was big. That was a big mental mindset shift that I needed to get comfortable with.
Yeah. And, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I've had similar feelings when I was starting the show, because, for me, I remember one of the first, like, are you leaving your job? I was like, no, I'm not leaving my job. Right. Like I'm interviewing other folks who have. And so for me, it was should I be putting this out there right now? Like, what am I doing? And so I share very similar sentiments when you start putting yourself out there online like that. And now one of the things I also noticed in your practice, and I hear you talking about now, especially that conversation in December of 2020, this helping people in corporate do things the right way and seize those opportunities, right? So what are some maybe common misconceptions or even myths, right, about career advancement that you encounter in your practice, and how do you go about addressing them?
Yeah, great question. I mean, and this is also like something personally that I had to deal with that I alluded to earlier. It's that thought, that self-advocacy and the act of speaking up and using your voice and sharing your wins and communicating with intent and impact, that it's labeled as almost like too aggressive. You create this story, it's too salesy, too self-promotional. So the default is, okay, I'm going to put my head down, I'm going to do the good work, and I'm going to wait for my turn. And that's just a losing strategy over and over again. And it's hard, especially, whether you're coming out of college, university, starting your path at that point, or you're changing roles to another company and you're starting all over, building a reputation. It's difficult to put yourself in that type of advocacy seat right away because you're worried about how it's going to show up and land on others. And that's a big misconception for a lot. And the way that I work with my clients through this is, what if we can come up with an approach that is aligned with you, that doesn't feel salesy, that feels genuine and authentic? And then you're able to cement yourself in that light and having those important conversations with always the intent of moving closer and closer towards your career goals. Because truly, Brian, and I know this is a harsh statement, but I'm going to say it anyways, nobody cares about your career as much as you do, period. And once this truly resonates and you realize this, that you need to fully take control and get into that driver's seat and make the moves that you need to make to advance, because no one else is going to do it for you. It's that confidence piece that truly starts to build on top of itself, like building blocks, as you step further into that belief of yourself that you can do it.
Absolutely. And you are so right with that. And I have learned about that the hard way on occasion. So I definitely know what you mean there. And that's actually a good segue. When you think about folks as they're building this, many people who might be listening, they may have faced challenges because they want X thing, and then they may get it. But then they may have some imposter syndrome when they get there, right? Like, am I really supposed to be here? Like, what's going on with this? And I'm sure you've probably dealt with this in some of the clients you've worked with. So how do you help people overcome this? And if you have any personal experiences with imposter syndrome from your career and how you navigated that, or on the client end, would love for you to share.
Yeah, I love this question so much because I actually have a potentially controversial opinion on imposter syndrome.
Okay.
And I truly believe that the right dose of imposter syndrome could actually be a very good thing for you. And so hear me out for a second. And there's a fine line, that like line in the sand that only you can draw for yourself, with awareness throughout the process when you know that it's getting too much. A healthy dose of imposter syndrome can truly help light that fire under your butt to like fill the gap that's making you feel like a fraud or that you're not good enough. Really? Because that's the resulting feeling and thought that comes from imposter syndrome. Everyone's going to figure out that I can't do this. I'm a fake, like I'm not good enough here. And whatever it is that you're doing that's making you feel that way, see that as an opportunity to fill that gap with knowledge and learning. And by being able to channel action to fill that gap and repeated action and taking those steps, that could actually close that feeling and dissipate that heaviness of imposter syndrome. The caveat here is really understanding where that line in the sand is, right? And knowing if you've gone overboard. Because once you do go overboard, it's no longer helping you, and it's consistently chipping away at that confidence until there's really none left and you're filled with doubt on a day-to-day basis. And that's the ugly part of imposter syndrome when lived with for too long. So personally, I felt huge imposter syndrome when I became a futures trader. One of my roles at the bank, I traded futures. It was one of those positions that I was slid into when I was coming back early from my first maternity leave with my daughter. I was asked to fill this spot because I was fully licensed and wasn't exactly what I envisioned myself as a next step in my career, but realized this was a great opportunity and a chance for me to lean into this new experience. So I said yes. I started and didn't get the mentorship that I needed to overcome some of these doubts and fear. It was an extremely busy time in the market. We were short-staffed. And I literally had to learn it all on my own. And it was heavy, Brian. It was so heavy. I questioned whether or not I belonged multiple times a day for a very long time. But with action and realizing the gaps that I needed to fill, that's where I prioritized my learning, and it got easier. Month after month, it slowly got easier. I started to receive feedback from my clients of how well I was, taking care of their accounts and the great trade idea I was bringing to their attention. From my teammates applauding me for how well I was grasping the concepts. It was working.
No, that's awesome to hear. And also, you've been speaking and sharing a lot of your stories online. And like I said, I've found your content and I like what you're sharing out there. What two lessons, or if you more than two, it's fine, right? But what maybe one or two key lessons or insights do you have to share that are really examples of how someone can really fast track themselves to professional success?
Great question. And the trick, the hardest part here is really narrowing it down to just two.
Right.
Self-advocacy.
If you have more, that's fine.
Yeah. Honestly, self-advocacy for me is a big one. And I know I've spent a lot of time talking about this over the past half an hour here. But outside of self-advocacy, it's truly that idea of taking control of your career and being in a position where you're constantly planning for that next move. Not to say that you always have to be moving from one place to another and gaining more, but being very aware of where you are in your career. And if in your role, you realize that there's nothing left to learn, you risk entering a place of complacency. And that's where dreams go to die. So if you're the type of person that wants to continue elevating themselves, trying new things, learning, be very aware of what's left to learn in your role and when you're nearing the end, because that's the opportunity for you to take a look at what's next and building blocks. Also, the importance of creating that visibility for yourself throughout the organization is so huge. And that this is something I only leaned into towards the latter part of my self-advocacy journey, how important it was to create those meaningful relationships with management and other employees on different desks in different parts of the organization. That visibility, those efforts in networking were such great milestones for me in my career and still are today, even in this new career. That genuine connection that you create and allowing yourself to lean into that opens up so many more doors than were ever possible before.
I love that. And, during the pandemic and even now currently, a lot of, coaching and different types of practices have sprung up. And I always I have had many coaches come on the show, and I'm always intrigued to hear about this. When it comes to, your coaching methods, the mentoring, how you guide professionals to take those next steps, what do you think sets your approach apart from others in the field?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, it's my experience. I've walked those halls, those nearly 17 years being in that high pressured environment. Not easy to climb up that corporate ladder, figuring it all out, all of those lessons learned and being in that space resonates so deeply with my audience that are living through that experience right now. And the way that I approach it is I very much lean on all of those years and the experience built through the consultancy side of my business, the advice, sharing the mistakes that I've made, all the lessons that I've learned, as well as on the coaching side through my certification with all the tools that I learned, the strategies to help bring out the best features that the client may not even see in themselves. And I'm just mirroring back to them. So through that collective hybrid approach, that truly speaks to my audience in a way that maybe wouldn't land with others.
No, I love that. I love that. And I think, I've read some of the comments on your posts as well, and I can clearly see those connections being made. So kudos to you for that. Now, I'd love to kind of talk a little bit about getting some, I would like you to give our audience some advice. And I really love this section because, one of my premises is that this is how we learn from others, right? There are many people who are going through similar circumstances. And I always like the listeners to hear from guests because you never know what folks are going through. And you mentioned something earlier in our conversation, this piece around self-advocacy, which I love, right? But there, you talked about there's that delicate balance. And so there's a balance between like how folks at times could be maybe too accommodating and also too assertive in ways, right? Like that's a dance that many of us do, right? So what advice would you give our listeners to help them find the right balance, if you will, in a corporate environment?
Yeah, I love this one. It truly being confident in the way you speak and how you communicate is your driving force of being able to lean into this strategy so effectively. So for example, I made this mistake so many times. I couldn't say no. I would say yes to every ask that was given to me, whether it was my team or another team. I always wanted to be that yes person, thinking that that was the best way to build my reputation, right? But what that did was it created a different reputation for me on the backside that I'm always going to be that go-to person for anything anyone needs. And being able to, with thoughtful communication, reply back, thank you so much for this opportunity to work on this. I am, however, working on A, B, and C at the moment. If this takes precedence over that, I'm happy to move it part of my priority list and move something else away. And taking ownership from that message and how you communicate it, learning how to do that was key in being able to decide where you stood in that divide and that balance that we just spoke about, right? And staying true to where you are and your schedule so you don't risk, burnout, and because that's technically what happens by continuing to be that yes person. You just get dumped with all of these asks. You're overworking yourself, right? And it's not necessarily channeling your efforts and prioritizing the projects and the initiatives that are what I like to call the needle movers, the ones that are going to progress your career. And you tend to be that person. But by effectively communicating and constantly looking at your schedule as a way to be able to prioritize doing the things that matter most and communicating in a way that honors your boundaries, but still respects the individual that's bringing that ask to you, that right there is the secret sauce of maintaining that balance.
Yeah. And that is a skill in and of itself, and a skill that takes practice for sure, because I'm sure people at times like, well, how do I tell my boss no in the nicest of ways? Right. So for sure. So thank you for sharing that. And now for people who may be thinking about, making a career transition, right? Or in the early stages of maybe even launching their own practice, any words of encouragement that you would offer them based on your own journey? And I think maybe you speak to folks who have been in a career for a very long time too, because there are a lot of folks who may want to make a move like you made, but they are stuck in some of the same cycles that you were. Like, I've been here so long, I've done all this work. Why would I leave this behind? So, what words of encouragement would you give to them?
Oh yeah, I love this one. Honestly, my biggest words of encouragement is don't dim that voice, don't dim that light that's making you excited about exploring this next path. Don't ignore it, lean into it, be curious, do your research, talk to people, engage in finding those answers that will give you the clarity that you need to take that step. And like I said earlier, Brian, no one will take away all of your experience that you've built up in corporate. Worst case scenario, it doesn't work out. It was a great learning lesson and it was a great story and part of your full journey of life that you can reflect back on. Nothing's going to stop you from going back to corporate where you still have a ridiculous resume of experience to fall back on. What you can't do is go back in time in 20 years and have a redo. You have one life to live, make the most of it, and that voice inside you is there for a reason. Once you have that aha moment, lean into it and just educate yourself, gain the data points, do the research that will make you comfortable, that take that next step and then that next step. And it doesn't need to be tomorrow. It could be small steps that lead into the decision to walk away in a year, in 2 years, but you're moving towards that. And the biggest thing for me was, even though it took the better part of 2 years to finally leave corporate, that rejuvenated energy in me was something that it fueled my action for my day to day, knowing that in my spare time, I was working towards the next step. And I wasn't just dimming that voice inside of me and ignoring it.
No, that's great to hear. And, as you look forward to this next chapter of your career, at the time we're recording this, it's hasn't even been a year yet since you've launched your own practice. But what are some of the things that you are most looking forward to in this next chapter?
Oh, honestly, Brian, for me, I just want to make a bigger impact. For me, it's creating bigger opportunities for my clients. I have such big dreams of being able to help, millions of people, and I know I'm teasing here for a second, but it's really just creating larger impact for my audience, for my clients, through the free information that I share on LinkedIn to more of the in-depth strategy work that we build out with my clients. It's really just empowering them to make more meaningful change in their lives. And the more people that I can touch and do this for and with, that to me is like really what it's all about. And I can't wait to dive in and help as many people as I possibly can. That's my goal.
Oh, I love that. And I'm wishing you the most success with that as well. And so what's one question that you have for me that I could answer?
Oh, yes. I love this one. So my one question for you, and we spoke a lot about self-advocacy today. I'd love to know, what was that pivotal moment throughout your career? Because you have an impressive resume as well, Brian. You've done a lot in your life. How has self-advocacy helped you achieve the success that you've been able to build up?
Great question. Where do I start with that one? Yeah, because my journey has been very scenic. So I'm going to do two parts, right? So one, I will say, one pivotal moment for me was actually when I was working for a city agency here in New York, and I was one of the attorney investigators in this investigative office, and I was looking to go from like an attorney 1, truthfully, just to attorney 2, right? Just go up one level, and I wasn't getting it, right? And it was hey, you already do all this overtime, you should be happy with the money. And I was like, that's not what I want, right? Like, I'm doing attorney 3 work. I'm just trying to go up a level. I'm not even asking for 3 work. I'm just trying to go to 2. And my boss at the time sent me a job posting for a deputy director position at another city agency and was like, I think you would qualify for this. And I'm like, but wait a minute. I can't even go from attorney 1 to 2. How am I going to jump 6 levels to now essentially lead an investigative unit at another agency? She's like, I think you're ready for this. And I kid you not, Natalie, she sent that to me. It was due the next day, like or 2 days, right? I don't want to be too dramatic. It was probably due in the next couple days. And I applied on the last day and ended up getting the role, right? And so that was one spark for me that let me know that I was shooting a little too low. Okay. I was shooting a little low. So that was one. So that was like a first. And the reason I mentioned that is because that then informs what I'm going to talk about next. So I'm in a current role now. The prior role that I had in my current organization, was a very, highly visible role. And, it's only, 1 or 2 years that folks, 2, maybe 3 years max that folks are in these types of roles. And it was a great learning experience. And, one of the things that I happened to see was where the org was going in relation to some of our learning and innovation work. And I happened to, you talk about self-advocacy. I said, hey, here's what I see happening. There was a new leader who was coming in, and I made essentially the pitch to say, hey, and this was, mind you, I'm only probably a year or so in the other role. I was like, hey, I see what's going on here. I'm interested in coming to work with you, right? And so I talked to the current leader at the time and the soon-to-be leader. I'm interested in working with you. And it was like, oh, really? Well, what's the interest, right? And so, and then I basically lay out my vision. And it was ballsy, to be honest, because one, I'm in this other role that like, well, why are you already looking to leave? And it's like, and it wasn't that I was looking to leave at that time, but one of the best pieces of advice that I got in the role was the purpose here is, yes, you do what you do for the boss, but you also get a chance to see what's happening in other places in the organization so you can figure out where you want to go. And so in my mind, I was like, look, at this stage in my career, I'm not looking to be voluntold to go to some place. I want to try to the best of my ability, control my own destiny, if you will. And I was able to do that. Essentially created as an idea for a role. Here's what I could do. Here's how we could bring some of these things together. And, first it was more conversation, right, about what that could be. And then I put it on, and that's when it became real. I put it on paper, right? Here's the vision. And it worked, right? It actually worked. And so I'm currently living in a moment where self-advocacy has been to my advantage. And because of that, I am getting a chance to experience things and work on things that are truly like, I feel like I'm meant to do. We talk about purpose. Like I'm really excited about the work that I'm doing. And I think shooting too low in the beginning, years and years ago, helped me to shoot my shot for this one. And so that's why I bring up those two.
I love it. It's such a great example of leaning into outside of your comfort zone, right? It was not comfortable for you. You had like a day and a half to turn around, right? Applying for that position, which you didn't think that you were qualified for at all. And you got it. And being able to reflect on that, hey, I did it then. Look how it worked out for me. I'm going to continue with this and evolving to the point where, how long was that journey from point A to point B where you created and manifested the role that you're in now?
Yeah. Oh, wow. So that's a great question. So that first example, that was probably 2012, right? Because I got the deputy role in 2013. And then what's interesting is that I was in that deputy role for about 3 years, moved into healthcare, was in kind of this HR space for 3 or 4 years, And it was only true. That was 2021-ish, 22, when I was like, okay, here's now an opportunity where I don't know what's next. Someone could tell me what's next and be like, oh, fine, I'll just go do whatever. Or I could try to direct it. And so to your point then, it's like 7-8 years, right? Before I finally, got to put that together. So, wow. Now that I think about that, that's a great point. You're right. You're right about that. Yeah. I never made that connection until now, to be honest. Wow.
Yeah. It's about looking at the journey and recognizing and celebrating that anchor moment when you leaned into self-advocacy, and then being able to reflect on all of the decisions and experiences that you've had since then, and everything how you've benefited because of leaning into the strategy, because of taking control of your career, because of making the moves for yourself versus waiting for someone to do it for you, and how, like, being able to reflect on that journey. It's powerful. It's powerful, and we should take moments to reflect back on it, because it's very impressive. And well, I will celebrate you in this moment and let you know how truly touching and inspiring it is. And I'm sure everyone listening will feel the same.
No, that's awesome. And thank you. That was a really good question, so I appreciate that. Well, look, I want to thank you for joining the show today. And as I mentioned kind of before we hit the record button, I have a surprise for you. You are actually guest number 75 on the show. So this is a milestone episode for me. So thank you for being a part of the show. I'm glad we really connected. And these podcasts are labors of love, and but they're nothing, truthfully, if I don't have guests. So I want to say thank you for being guest number 75. And we'll be seeing a lot of posts on that this week. but I'm glad we connected, and would love for you to share where our listeners can find you and support some of the work you're doing.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's truly an honor to spend this last hour with you. I'm so grateful that we did connect, and I can't wait for more conversation into the future. And for everyone listening, whoever wants to connect, please, I welcome you. My virtual door is always open. Best way to connect with me, honestly, LinkedIn, that social platform that I'm vulnerably putting myself out on a daily basis. Come message me, connect with me, message. Let's have a conversation. If anything in this discussion triggered you and you're left feeling, you know what, there's something that I'm not doing that I want to start doing, and maybe, it's time, my time is now to lean into self-advocacy, let's have a conversation about it. So LinkedIn is definitely the best place to reach me.
Perfect. Well, look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank my guest, Natalie Serebrennik, for joining us today. I will share all of her information in the show notes, and I hope you all have a great week, and we'll definitely see you all next time. Thank you again, Natalie.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Why I Left. Be sure to join us next time for more stories from the Great Resignation. Visit us at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.